So in 1935, coming back to there, in May, these young men, the Organization of Single Unemployed, started out on a trek to Ottawa, and they traveled by boxcar. I mean, they didn't have any means of transportation. They went from city to city by boxcar, as lots of them had been doing for years, going back and forth across the country looking for work. And at every stop, they were greeted by people who urged them on their way. Women's groups got together and brought them food as they moved from city to city. I'm not sure how many days they were on the way, but this was a very alarming situation as far as the government, the conservative government of R.B. Bennett was concerned, because they were gathering support and gathering more attention as they made their way. So the authorities decided to stop that at Regina in Saskatchewan. And they did that by waiting. There was a great public meeting being held in Regina at a place called Victoria Park. And when they had got the crowd all in there, the police attacked with horses and weapons and broke up the crowd and broke up the demonstration by terrible aggression of the police, and arrested some of the leaders. And at that point, the leaders of the march decided that they were not going to be able to face what would obviously be continued and greater harassment. So they decided to return. But a number of their delegates were allowed to go down and make a case to Ottawa, but of course it was ignored completely by the authorities. So so they returned to Vancouver, but they didn't go back to the camps. The fact that they had taken their demonstration had caused discussions to start arising between the cities and the provinces and the national government as to what, if anything, should be done. But each level of authority knew that it wasn't them that should be responsible, it was somebody else. So there were some troubled times in the ensuing months, where at one point the mayor of the city of Vancouver read a riot act to disperse the crowds that had gathered down at Victory Square. So we were left with still nothing really being done about the unemployed as 1935 and 1936 passed along their way. And now, in the meantime, or just shortly after that, the worries about Germany and fascism in Germany and in Italy were causing great concern. By the time I was in grade 10, I see that by my school book I had forgotten, but I had written a poem to publish there about the youth and war and the terrible horror of war. By the time I reached 1939, I had got to university in the fall of 1938, and I hadn't, after the Young Pioneers, after I was finished there, I didn't join the Young Communist League then, but I did when I got to university, and there was a very good group of people there, many of whom have made a lot of contribution in their own ways in the years since then.
If you think in a broader sense, it wasn't just in British Columbia or in Canada, but this kind of activity, and certainly in the United States, there was tremendous fight back. And I think what we need to think about, and we will discuss the upcoming war at the time and how people reacted, we have to think about how come people then became so active and so involved. You know, it didn't matter if people were working and they were, reasoning it wasn't their problem sort of thing. They still participated. They would give money, give food, go to demonstrations. I read 10,000 people would end up at a meeting in Powell Street grounds on very little notice. And if you think about, they didn't have, not too many people had phones. Most of them couldn't afford it then. But by word of mouth, that you can sense the unity that people felt into fighting what was happening to them. So if you look at today, you see we have this apathy that is very difficult to get people out, as you can see. And we have to think about why. What stirred people in the 1930s to become involved and to fight back? Did it take a long time after the 1929 crash and before people began to organize and fight back?
I was just thinking I probably shouldn't have stopped quite so soon, because there was, you know, what had happened after when Hitler had come to power, and there was his rapid advances and his obvious intention to pay no attention to the rules that had been set up for military conduct of countries at the end of the First World War. Then there was the moves on his part. The countries were trying to just sign pacts with each other. Sometimes it was with one, sometimes with another. But in Canada, in Germany and Italy, and Britain and France, they signed agreements almost as soon as Hitler came to power. That was the first thing they did, seeking to be sure that he wouldn't continue on their soil quite fruitlessly.
Elspeth mentioned the agreements that were being signed between various countries, and there's a historian in the States, Quigley is his name, has written a really good account of that period and showing how the British maneuvered and manipulated different countries by signing agreement to get Germany to go east. And it's very deliberate, you see, and they did it just by really signing agreements. Well, of course, we know about the Chamberlain giving into the fascists in Germany and allowing them to remilitarize the Rhineland. Now, that was for the purpose of containing the French. And then they signed agreement with the French government and took away, which eventually took away the ability of France to come to the aid of Czechoslovakia and Poland, because France had agreements that they would come to the if Germany attacked Czechoslovakia or Poland, France would come to their aid. That was nullified by the British. And they allowed the Germans to militarize the West, the Rhineland, so that they were right there. And then they hoped to push the fascists to go east, and they made all kinds of agreements that prevented the other countries from working to protect each other. But all of these things going on, and it makes you think, well, we're just like a bunch of puppets. We don't really know what these people are doing behind the scene. And it's no different today. If you follow what the US NATO bloc are doing in Central Asia, you realize they're doing exactly the same thing. They are moving into all of the countries in the Middle East. They're putting their military there in different countries. At this point in time, they basically have China and Russia surrounded with their military. So you see, we're in a similar situation today, where they were using the Nazis, fascists, basically to their own end, and they were financing them. We all know that. So this kind of manipulating is just like a group of very powerful people manipulating the people of the world.